So for this problem, we are being asked to graph the inverse sine of 1/4 x on this limited interval. Now this is a really fun and interesting problem because we're going to wind up using so many of the skills that we've learned over the last several units and even years. Okay, so let's get started. First of all, this is a complex function. It has this extra transformation inside with the 1/4 x. So let's start with the parent function, y equals inverse sine of x. If we can graph this, well, then we can do the transformation of 1/4 from there. Okay, so how would I graph this? Now, understand that if I have y equals inverse sine of x, that means that the sine of y is equal to x. So this is what my strategy will be. So using this version of the equation, if I start with y, I can come up with x values. So I'm going to choose some y values and then find the x values. But I need to be a little bit careful about how I pick my y values. Let's look at a little diagram of the unit circle. Alright, so first of all, the inverse sine function is only defined on the right hand side of the unit circle, okay, between pi over 2 and negative pi over 2. So I'm going to definitely choose y values over here. I think we can get away with just choosing a few key y values, like this one, and this one. Alright, that should be enough. So those y values on the unit circle, okay, notice that this is inside the sine function. So we're talking about angles, okay? So what we're talking about is negative pi over 2, okay, that's the angle down here, and then this angle is 0, and then the top angle is pi over 2. Okay, now these x values will be the sine of these y values. So what's the sine of negative pi over 2? Well, the sine down here is negative 1 because we're down 1. What's the sine right here? The sine of 0 is 0 because it's right on the x-axis. And finally, what's the sine of this y value? What's the sine of pi over 2? That's positive 1. Okay, because it's 1 up. So I have this little chart of values. But so far, this is for the parent function, y equals inverse sine of x. So what I really need is I need to do this 1/4 x. So here I'm going to draw on my understanding of how transformations work. When you have a number inside of a function, this is going to be a horizontal stretch or a compression, but it's the opposite of what it looks like. If the number is less than 1, it's actually a horizontal stretch. If this number had been like just a 4, then that would actually be a horizontal compression. Okay, but since this is a stretch, that means it's going to change my x values and make them bigger. And specifically, the 1/4 tells me that it's going to be a stretch by 4. Okay, it's the reciprocal. So I'm going to have new x values then, and I'll make a new x column on my little chart here. And I will just multiply all of my original x values by 4, and that will give me this horizontal stretch by 4. So if I multiply all these by 4, that's going to give me -4, 0, and 4. Okay, so these are my new x values, so I can really throw away my old x values. So these are the coordinates of 3 points on my graph. -4, comma, -pi/2, 0, comma, 0, and 4, comma, pi/2. So basically, I'm going to look through these options, and I'm going to pick the one that matches the 3 points I just found. Let's start with 0, comma, 0, because that's going to be the most obvious. Notice how this graph does not pass through 0, comma, 0. So I'm going to throw it out. Okay, this one does, so I'm not going to throw that out. This graph does not pass through 0, comma, 0. So this one is out. Okay, so let's go back to this one. So fine, I have 0, comma, 0. That's good. Check. Now, what about -4, comma, -pi/2? Well, if I look over here at -4, -pi/2 would be down here somewhere. Okay, it looks like this is probably the point -4, comma, +pi/2. All right, but we want -pi/2, not +pi/2. So that tells me that this graph is not going to be the answer. All right, now let's check that last option. So we already had 0, comma, 0. All right, now we're looking for -4, -pi/2. So here's -4 and -pi/2. Okay, and we wanted +4, +pi/2. So at +4, here we are at +pi/2. Okay, so that tells us that option D is the correct answer.